All right, well, guys, welcome. I am so glad that you are here. 6 months ago, we started the Bridge Church of Hendricks County, or as I'm pretty much the only one who loves to call it, the Bridge HC. It will catch on. That name will catch on, the Bridge HC. Say it with you guys. 1, 2, 3. The Bridge HC. 6 months ago, we started, and we had barely a table filled. And so it overjoys me as a pastor to know that there are people in our community who support the Bridge. I know there's a lot of visitors who are coming tonight because it's Holy Week, and so we welcome you there. But it is encouraging because these types of services point to what God is doing. And I look forward to the unchurched of our community and those who are detached or unattached from church to find a safe place to belong here. That's what we're all about. We want to be a bridge between people who are unchurched and Jesus. We want to be a bridge between the unchurched and the church. We want to be a bridge between the church and the community so that many people can not only learn about Jesus, but they can connect with him in a real and tangible way. And this is why we're doing this series called The Jesus You Thought You Knew, because culturally speaking, there are a lot of misconceptions about Jesus. So over the last few weeks, what we've been talking about are some of the specific and important aspects of who Jesus is according to the gospel writers. And tonight, we're going to finish that series by going through certain verses in the book of John. So if you want to open your Bibles if you have them. If not, they'll be up here on the screen. You don't have to worry about that. But we will be in the book of John. We'll be in 3 separate chapters, so you'll be able to find them pretty quickly. I want to start tonight by asking a simple question. What does it mean to be human? Okay, not what we just saw on the CV screen just a little bit ago, in case you forgot that. That is not, hopefully, what any human looks like. And stuff up tonight. My teams are not going to be sleeping in our room tonight. But what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human? It's one of our toughest questions, but I think it's one that I think we all try to figure out, not just as individuals, but as a culture. I think we think about our humanity when we choose our careers. How can we be a responsible human in this world that we live in? How can we make it better, right? We think of it when we consider our biggest relationship, when we talk about who we're going to marry or the types of friends that we hold to. I think we think about our humanity at some sort of level, even if it's a small one. And I think even subconsciously, we ask it whenever we interact with those around us, whether they be strangers or people that we've known our entire lives. But especially, I feel, we act this way when we're encountering somebody that we're different. I think we think about our shared commonalities when we meet somebody who is different than us. Because even those who are completely different, we still have some characteristics that we all share. Now, there is this place called the Human Library in Denmark. And I don't think I have a picture, I don't. Called the Human Library in Denmark, where they get people together of all different lifestyles, all different races, all different mindsets, and they have these volunteers who decide to be, I'm going to be a human book. And you can go to the library during these events, and you can quote unquote check out a person. You can sit down with them and have a conversation about what it is that makes them different. It's a beautiful kind of event. It's really fun to watch some of the videos that they have on their website and some of the pictures that they have as well. This person who's all tatted up, huge earrings on, and just looks completely different. Then you'll have somebody who is button collared in a tie and a suit and jacket, sitting together having an honest conversation about race, or having an honest conversation about the LGBTQ community, or having an honest conversation, but we hope, about Jesus, right? And this is because we all want to know, what is it about humanity that brings us together? What does it mean to even be human? Understanding who we are as humans, I believe, is crucial to our faith, because it is an essential aspect of who Jesus was and still is. Jesus is as human as any one of us. And he always will be. And so there's no better person in my mind to learn what it means to be human than from Jesus. That's why we're going to talk about what does it mean to be human through the eyes of Jesus from the perspective of John. Now, like I said, today we're finishing our series on the Jesus you thought you knew. We're going to talk about Jesus's humanity, why that matters. So here's what we're covering in our three sections. Our first section, which we're going to get into in a second, is what does it matter that Jesus is human? We're not going to take a theological look at this. We're going to take a practical look at this. Why does it matter that Jesus is human? Our second section will answer the question of how does Jesus' humanity impact us today as American humans, as humans in the 21st century? How does that impact us? And then our third section is in how should we as people of faith, people who are seeking, people who are asking, how should we respond to Christ's humanity? So let's dive right into it, talk about our first section, which I'm calling a human experience. All right, I want to read from the very first verses of John's gospel. John chapter 1, starting in verse 1. Here's what John writes. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was what has been made. And in him was life. And that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. This is verse 9, by the way. We skipped a couple. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming from the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. And the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, that's a lot to digest, but at the very beginning of John's gospel, he makes it very clear that not only is Jesus God, but he is also a human. A human that came into our world. A human that was rejected by most, but accepted by a few. A human that lived like us, but he did it differently than anyone ever has, or that anyone ever will. Because Jesus did it with glory, with grace, and with truth. In other words, Jesus lived a human life. And he was a human who had lived life without one sin so that our sins could be erased. Now, we'll get to that a little bit later in our third section. But John reinforces this point, that Jesus is God in human form throughout the rest of his gospel. He makes a point for us to see Christ's humanity through emotional stories that really just grip the heart if you really give them a good read. We see Christ get angry when he flipped the tables, right? A lot of guys like that verse, Jesus walking into a church and flips the tables. He does that, and then he pulls out a whip and starts kicking it. We see him devastated when thousands leave him after a difficult teaching. When Jesus says that if you want to be a part of me, you need to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And nobody understood what he meant. Thousands of people literally left him, except for the 12. We see him compassionate. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in the second section, but the woman who was brought to Jesus after she was found to be committing adultery, Jesus showed compassion on her and not condemnation. We see him mourning. When his friend, his brother Lazarus died, he went to the funeral 4 days later, and everybody was mad at him for not showing up earlier, and everyone was just weeping. He couldn't hold it in. We've also seen him fully love. John tells us that Jesus showed the full extent of his love in John chapter 13 when he washed the feet of his disciples. But why? Why did Jesus have to be human? And why did John bring out Christ's humanity more than any other gospel had? Well, first, I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but first, Jesus needed to be human so that we could be saved. In order for us to repair humanity's relationship with God, we needed a relationship, we needed a person who had never sinned. A perfect sacrifice to take our place, to be our punishment, to sacrifice themselves for the sake of everyone else. Greater love has no man than this, that he would give up his life for another. And since God is loving and gracious, instead of raising up a human separate of him, he became human himself. I know that might sound confusing, but it's true. He came down and became human, lived our lives. For John, the cross was important, obviously. The resurrection was important, obviously. But the journey to the cross was just as important. That's why he brings out Christ's humanity. That's why he spends so much time describing various emotional stories from Christ's ministry. This God, who became one of us, who put on our flesh and lived 33 years, shared our experiences. He didn't just manifest himself as a human and go straight to the cross. Nobody would have blamed him. He still would have done it. It still would have been the job. He would have been perfect. He would have came out 33 years old, nailed to the cross, called it a day 3 days later. Jesus wasn't a part-timer. He was fully committed. He was born into our world. He grew up in our world. He faced many of the trials that we do, even today. He was tempted the same ways that we are. And he experienced every emotion that we face throughout our lifetime. Jesus didn't try to be one of us. Jesus is one of us. He relates to us. He understands us. And most importantly, he loves us. Even despite the obvious shortcomings that each and every one of us have. Now, if you're new with us here tonight, we're about to enter into a time of discussion. This is how this kind of works for us, okay? We don't believe in just listening to a guy stand up here and lecture. Even my dog falls asleep to me. All right, so what we do is that we take breaks every 10 minutes or so, depending on how long-winded I get, and we ask you to discuss what you just heard. All right, now if you're familiar with me and how I do things, if you've ever been to a coffee conversation before in the past, it's about the same thing, okay? But if you haven't, you're about to get these questions. They're there on the table for you if you don't want to read the table. Or if you just want to talk about anything that has been said, we have some generic clips on the very front page for you to look at and to use as a point of discussion if you would like, okay? So take about 10 minutes. We have table leaders at each table, at least we should. If not, somebody can volunteer to be the table leader. And facilitate the discussion, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes, and we'll continue on with our second section. Let's rehash what we just talked about. I hope you had a great conversation, by the way. Jesus needed to be human. One, so that we could be saved, right? That's part of the whole idea here, but also so that he could be relatable to us as humans. Christ's life opens us up for a relationship with God. And I think that's important for us to understand, but his experiences as a human helps us to desire that relationship more. If I can relate to Christ, I want to be with Christ. And I think that's part of the large part of what John is doing when he writes the gospel. Now, outside of a greater desire to be in a relationship, the question that I think we need to ask ourselves is, how does Jesus' humanity impact us? Or how should it impact us? Because I know that maybe it doesn't impact us the way that it should. Well, for this, I want to go to that story of the woman who was caught in the act of adultery. John chapter 8. It'll be up here on the screen. Here's what John writes. He says, at dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. Now, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" Now, they were using this question as a trap, obviously, in order to have a basis for accusing. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. And when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and he wrote on the ground. And at this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones dispersed until only Jesus was left, but the woman still standing. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." I love that story. And I love the fact that Jesus responds the way that he does. Because whether we want to admit it or not, whether we want to talk about it or not, Jesus has a way of bringing out the real us. He has a way of exposing us for who we really are. Here we have the teachers of the law and the Pharisees throw a woman caught in the act of adultery. Why they didn't throw the guy out too, I'll never know. I know that's all cultural stuff, but still, they throw this woman out who was caught in the act of adultery in front of Jesus to see how he would handle, in their minds, the sinner. And the mere fact that they did this proves what Jesus does to people. These people, these so-called leaders, didn't care about the woman caught in adultery. They didn't try to help her reconcile her relationship with God or even with her husband for that matter. Had Jesus not intervened, had they not brought this woman to him, they would have killed her. They would have made an example out of her. These so-called leaders didn't want people to follow God. They wanted people to follow them. They wanted people to fear them. Because fear is a great motivator. Now, in other situations, thankfully, we see Jesus bring out the best of people. Those who were seeking the truth, throughout the Gospel of John, they asked thoughtful questions. Think about Nicodemus. Even though he went into the depths of night and he met Jesus alone, he still asked thoughtful questions. Those who were passionate, overflowed with love for Jesus. Think about Peter when Jesus washed his feet and Peter got really exuberant and said, "Not just my feet, Lord, but just bathe my whole body." A little weird, Peter, calm down. But he was just so in love and so passionate about what God was doing. He wanted to be an example. And then there was those who were helped, showed their gratitude by speaking freely after they were healed. Think about the blind man who went around and told people that Jesus had healed him and helped him to see. And then there was those who were confused. Not those who disagreed and violently disagreed, but those who were confused were able to speak honestly with Jesus without fear of judgment. You know, when Lazarus died, Mary and Martha questioned Jesus. They questioned why he didn't come earlier. They questioned why he didn't heal him. And Jesus didn't condemn them for those questions. He accepted them and answered them with love and compassion like Jesus does. Jesus had the ability to bring out the best or the worst in every person. So what does he bring out in you? Honestly, I think that Jesus brings out both the good and the bad in our lives. There are things that when we experience Jesus in a real and tangible way that are highlighted as good things that we should be motivated by and encouraged by. You know, when I first became a Christian, I had a lot of adults tell me, "You know, you talk a lot. You might think about being a preacher." Here we are, right? Now, some might consider that a bad thing. We'll do the vote later. But there are times, I think, when bad things come out of us. See, Jesus said that when he left, he was going to give us the Holy Spirit. He was going to convict us of both our good things and our bad things. And this is all that's all that we're talking about. The Holy Spirit convicts us of things that we're doing right. He says, "Yeah, keep it up, keep going on." But then there's things that he convicts us of and says, "Dude, you need to change. You need help." And I can help you with that. Because there are times we act like the religious leaders. There's times when we allow our desire for control to get in the way of our faith, and we come to God with stubborn pride instead of humble grace. I know I do it all the time. There are times, though, that when we come to Jesus, he looks at us, he says, no, there's something in there I want to cultivate. There's something in there I want to change. There's something in there I want to grow and make better. It's times where we are vulnerable with God, open with God, and he pulls out those beautiful parts of us that I think every one of us has that should define us as humans, not just individually, but He has a way of doing this collectively too. One of the things I love about our church, as small and young as it is that we have people here who care about those who've not been cared about. We have people who welcome those who have been kicked out of places. That's a collective kind of environment and culture that we have here at the Bridge. Those beautiful moments of compassion and love show itself through service and honest discussion. Which is why we do what we do. These moments cause us to seek God's love and to see others the way that Jesus sees us. So what does Jesus bring out in you? That's one of the questions that we're going to transition into as we start our second discussion time. Again, we're going to take 10 minutes to talk about these things. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to raise your hand. I'll come to the table. We'll discuss it together. But take the next 10 minutes, discuss the questions on the table, or whatever might strike you, and then we'll come back and we'll hit our third and final section. Bibles and how that sound is like music to their ears. And this kind of environment and this kind of culture that we're trying to produce here, just hearing conversation, hearing godly conversation, spiritual conversation, hearing the chatter around the room, to me, it's a chorus. I love it. And so I'm so glad that you guys are discussing and having lively conversation and good conversation. Let's talk a little bit about what we just went over, just so we're all clear on where we're going. Jesus' impact on humanity is honest and unavoidable. We can't avoid or deny that Jesus has an impact on everybody, regardless of whether they believe in him or not. He brings out both the good and the bad in us. I think that's important for us to understand, because there's always something to highlight, also something to work on. But he also brings out those collectively beautiful moments where humanity can show compassion and love. And oftentimes we see this in the face of tragedy, right? Over the last week, the response that people have had towards those who've been impacted by the 19 and counting tornadoes that have touched down in our state this last week has been overwhelming. A lot of people who go to Cornerstone know that our food pantry person, Kelly Odom, her hometown was hit by the tornado last week, and already she has gotten a response of a ton of people saying, "We want to help." And by the way, if you go to our Facebook page, Bridge HC on Facebook, we will be posting a place for collecting donations and things that we'll be taking up to Sullivan as well. And if you are interested in actually going up and providing hands-on help, come talk to me after our service tonight, and I'm going to try to get a handful of us to go up together to help however we can. And somebody has to go to make sure I don't touch power tools, because the good Lord blessed me with my mouth and hands, and so nobody wants me to touch a chainsaw. But if you want to come talk to me afterwards, and we'll come get something together, and we'll just talk offline about that. But these are these beautiful moments, right, where humanity comes together and says, no, we're going to do something beautiful. We're going to do something godly. We're going to do something that shows love and compassion to those who are going through a tough time. Jesus became human for our salvation. We know this, but also so we can relate to him as a human. And as human, and his impact as a human is undeniable. But what do we do with all this? I mean, this is a lot to kind of take in. What do we do with this? And especially during this week, the week where we focus on Christ's death and resurrection, what do we do? What should our response be to Christ's humanity? Well, for that, I want to read the best prayer ever written in the entire Bible. John records it in chapter 17. If you grew up in church, you know it as the high priestly prayer. I know it as Jesus' prayer. Starts in verse, I'm just going to read a portion of it. I'm going to start in verse 18. Here's what Jesus says. Here's what John writes. As you sent me, Jesus, into the world, I have sent them, the disciples, into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may be truly sanctified. But my prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. Man, if you are a highlighter, highlight that verse. That is so crucial to us as Christians today. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. And then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Another highlightable verse, in my opinion. Here's what's going on. This is my absolute favorite section of John's gospel because it shows and shares the very heart of God. And it's not very often that you get to hear a private prayer. Yet Jesus' prayer is right there for us to enjoy. It is an honest look about how Jesus feels about us, what he's doing for us, and what he wants from us as a result. And it's not only a godly prayer, but it is also very much so a very human prayer. When Jesus offers this prayer to the Father, he lifts each and every one of us up, not because he has to, but because he cares about us. He loves us. He prays for us as believers to love one another and to simply get along, which I think we need to start doing a lot more than we do. But not just for our benefit. Our ability to love and get along leads others to Christ. And this is why I love Jesus. He not only lifts up the believers, he lifts up those who don't even believe in him yet. The people who hate him, the people who despise him, the people who, like Paul, at the time that this was written, at the time that he said these words, didn't know Christ from Adam. And would even hate Christ before he came to love him. Jesus prayed for Paul and others like Paul. Our ability to love and to get along, it leads others to Christ. People in our day and age, like Paul, who needs just a miraculous kind of interaction to get them to come to Jesus. You know, one of our core goals as a church is to help be a bridge between the unchurched and Jesus. That's why we started this church. But that cannot happen if we, as a collective church, cannot get along with one another. So this is why our response to Christ, especially in his humanity, is so important. I have 4 things that I think we need to do to respond to Christ. They're up here on the screen. Take a picture with your phone or write them down. It's up to you. Number 1, we need to believe. If you're sitting here today, you've never known Jesus Christ. You've never put your faith in him. Today's the day. Not only is Christ's heart for the believer, it's for those who do not believe to accept the truth of who he is and what he has done. Now, it may sound obvious, but we need to truly believe in the fullness of who Christ is and what he stands for. This is the thing that confuses me so much about people who profess Christ as Lord, that they profess Christ as Lord, but they don't do a thing that he says. But we have to do both. We have to believe in what this man stood for, what he preached, and what he tells us to do. We got to follow it to the best of our ability. And that's why number 2, not only do we need to believe, but we also need to receive. To truly believe is to receive the truth by entering into a relationship with Jesus. It's to understand that Jesus was sent to live and to die as a human because he loves us with every ounce of who he is. That's why the point is to love. We have to love because the response to Christ's love for us is to love him and to love others in the same way. This is why Jesus says the second greatest commandment is to love others as you love yourself. To love is to put others before yourself, to put others before ourselves, to show them Jesus, not for who we think he is, but for who he actually is, and to serve the needs of others without complaint. And then finally, we must unite. The biggest response, I believe, the one Jesus spends the most time on in his prayer, is that we as believers, those who have already been saved, that we must be united. We have to stop letting petty arguments and differences get in the way of who we are as Christians, as followers of Christ. Christ's humanity should make us examine our humanity. That's the point. It should make us examine our relationship with God, where we're at with Him and Jesus. It should make us examine our hearts and our motives, why we do the things that we do. But it should also make us examine our relationship with those in the church and those outside of the church. Meaning that we have to have a relationship with people outside of the church. And let me tell you, that is what, in a world where we are segregating, in a world where we enter into echo chambers each and every day, and we're only getting more and more divisive into these areas, it is so hard to fellowship and to relate, to be in relationship with people with whom we disagree. It is the hardest thing to do, but I'm telling you now, it is the most rewarding thing to do if you do it with the heart and the mind of Jesus Christ. We need to examine these relationships and strive to better them in our everyday. Now, this is where I want you to stop and focus as we go into our last set of discussion questions. Like before, we're going to spend about 10 minutes, and then after we're done, we're going to have a special time of communion. So please make sure that you prepare yourselves for that as well. We'll explain what we're going to do here once we're done. But take the next 10 minutes and discuss these questions, whatever is on your heart and mind, and we'll come back together. We ask people to make a decision. And any of the decisions that are on that card are valid and welcomed and not judged. And so we have a place for people to come and take communion. This week we're going to do communion all together, but usually we hold communion back here for those who want to take communion. We take it collectively as a group because we believe that communion should be a community thing, not an individual, not just an individual thing. And we usually take that there. We also ask if maybe your heart's not right for communion, and this will be the case tonight. If you just don't feel like your heart is right for communion, or you've got some things that you need to pray about, or you just got some things that are on your heart and you want somebody to pray for you. I believe I asked Brooke, thank you. Brooke, one of our elders here, will pray for you in the back. You go to her in the back of the room and let her know what you're praying for, and she will pray for you. If you have questions about anything that we talked about tonight, or what we are, or who we are, what we do, what we're doing in the community, after communion, I will be out in the hallway to answer any and all of your questions. Please feel free to do that, and ask those questions. Or if you just need to get up and go because it's getting late and you have to take care of some things at home, that is okay. I will say this the day I die. Getting up and leaving is an okay option. All right, if that's what you need to do, there will be no judgment here. Have blessings. We pray that you come back next week. All right. Now, before we wrap up, let me just say this: Christ's humanity. That's what we're talking about, and it's important to our Easter week because it makes us examine ourselves. It makes us examine our relationships. It makes us examine our hearts and our motives. Christ is the example that we follow. For now and always, the author of Hebrews calls him the author and perfecter of our faith. He's the one that we need to model ourselves after. And that's why we come to this moment that we do every week called one thing. And this one thing is the thing that I want you to talk about throughout your week, the thing I want you to consider, pray about, discuss with those people in your home. Christ's humanity is our sanity. Christ's humanity is our sanity. What do I mean by that? Well, our sanity refers to a soundness, a rationality, a health of the human mind. What we believe, what I believe, is that soundness and rationality and health can only come from a relationship with Jesus Christ. And this week, the week that we look to the cross, the week that we look to the resurrection, the week that we look to Jesus, we should also be looking at how he lived. We should model our lives the same way. Now, next week, we're going to talk about our new series that we're calling Handle with Care. And I hope you can come back for it because we're going to talk about what does it look like when we go against God? How do we respond? How do we come back? And we're going to take a look at the disciples and Paul and how these faithful people dropped the ball and had moments of disbelief, moments of confusion, moments of rejection, and how they handled that and picked up their faith and started following Christ once again. That's what we're going to talk about over the next 3 or 4 weeks as we come back together as a church. And we come back every Tuesday at 6:30.